Within SOLIDWORKS, we can use all the power of Microsoft Excel to drive our parts and to create various configurations of the same part. To get started, we need a base part that we're going to drive. Let's get started with 16.3-1. This is just a block with a hole in the center. We're then going to link the values to drive the size with the design table. Let's take a look at the underlying sketch here and take a look at some of the values. Pretty simple sketch here, just outlining a few things. And notice if I double click on any one of these dimensions, here's the value. So I can actually overwrite this value or the name of this, right? So I'm going to type in here just capital W for the width. Over here, I'm going to double click and say this one's going to be the height. So just H. This one here, I can make it whole. So I can change it to anything I really like. And over here, I'm going to change this one to radius. And there it is. If I double click back on that, notice now it's radius at sketch 1, right? So those are the values we're going to input into our table to drive this part. Click OK, and those values have now been updated. And go back to the extrude. And then you can see here the extrude is just extruding it 1 inch. So it makes it pretty simple to understand. And it's saying D1. So that's the dimension 1 in that extrude. Click OK. Now, we haven't really played with many of these other tabs here at the top of the screen yet. So the first one's the Feature Manager. The next one is the Property Manager, and then followed by that is the Configuration Manager. Now, if we have a part and we want to make some small modification to it, I can always go here and I can right-click and I can say Add Drive Configuration, or if I click on the top one, I can say Create a new configuration or add a configuration to that part. So then I could go in and maybe change the size of the hole to be a smaller hole, and you have 2 configurations of the same exact part. Now, we could do that directly, or we can use Microsoft Excel to drive a table and create the configurations for us. So to do that, let's go up here to say Insert, Tables, Design Table. Okay. The auto creates just fine. We're going to use that as the default and click on OK. And as soon as I do that, it actually opens Excel in the background, and then it asks us which values we want to import into Excel to be driven. Now, if we just wanted to change the length of the extrusion, we could use this one here, which is just that D1 we looked at. And right now that's 1 inch. So if we wanted to have a bunch of different lengths of this piece with a bunch of different values, we could just drive that. If we want to drive all the values, we need to select all these. Hold on Control, select all those, and click on OK. What that does, it makes a little window of Excel inside of SOLIDWORKS. You notice it's the default configuration, and here's those values that we input before. So if I want to add another configuration, all I need to do here is just name it. So I'll say like C2 for configuration 2. And type in some values. So I'm going to say type 0.5, type in 10, 5, 2, and I'll extrude it 2 inches. Those are those values. And I can keep going if I want to, and type in some more values, C3. And if I only want to change one or a couple of these values, instead of having to type them all in, I can use the Excel command, which is just fill down, and select over all those windows, and hit Control D for fill down. And that just copies those values down. Then I can just change the ones I want to change. So I can say this is maybe 12 inches, and I want to extrude it 8. And if I want to, I can name this anything I want. I can add a configuration, name Bob, for instance. Doesn't really matter. You can name your configurations anything you want. And use that same technique of fill down. So Control D. And do a couple more things here. We'll change this to 8, and we'll change this one to 12. Okay, so if you do add another configuration, we got to make sure that we fill in all the values. Otherwise, it's going to give us an error. Okay, so as soon as we've got all the values filled out that we want, we click anywhere here in the graphics window outside of Excel. Click there, and it's going to say it created these configurations for us. That's great. Click on OK. If I go over here to the Configuration Manager, you can see these are the new configurations that have been created. So we're still on the default, right? But if I want to go and look at my new configurations, I just double click on them. Double click on that, and wow, we got a much bigger part now. You can see how that rapidly changes that part's shape and size. Double click on this one, makes a small part, and a bunch of different options here we can take a look at. So it's pretty neat what you can do with just changing those values. The part really is the same type of part, just the input values have changed. Now, if I want to go back and edit the table or change things around, under the Tables tab here, and keep in mind we're under the Configurations tab, not the Property Manager, Configurations tab, Tables, and then here's that Design Table. So if I want to change that table, I can right-click on it. I can say Edit Table, which will bring up that same little window. Or I can say edit the table in a new window, which actually open up the full version of Excel. Click on that, and there it is. Okay, it's going to ask us, these are some configurations. Click on OK, and I'm going to jump over here to Excel, open it up, and expand out these windows so we can see it. And under the View tab and just make it a little bit bigger. So you can see the same table is now open in Excel, and we can add more configurations if we wanted to. We can also use the power of Excel here to figure things out for us. So I can say this row here, and I can fill down, Control D, and I'm going to change this one to Gabe. Okay, now if I want to derive some of these values dynamically, for instance, if I want to say this value here, maybe this whole, I want to make it half the size of the width. So I can actually just say equals, and the input bar here, just exactly as Excel would work, and say this value here divided by 2, and click OK. And that's completely fine. We can use all the power of Excel. In fact, if we skip either a column or a row, we can go out here and calculate some values out. I could say this cell is equal to that cell plus that cell minus that cell and divided it by this cell, whatever you want to put in here, and just create some crazy value. So we don't probably want to put a negative number, but whatever you calculate out, you can go ahead and use any values you want in Excel to go calculate these values and fill them out. So you can really come up with some very powerful equations. And we can go up into Excel and use their equation editor and all the lookup tables and values, concatenate, a lot of real powerful things inside of Excel that we can use to fill out our design table. Once we've got these things looking good, we can go in and easily create new configurations. But keep in mind, when we do create configurations, make sure that we're making values that make sense. Like here's the width of the part, it's 10. The height is 12. And then here's that hole. Well, what happens if I make this hole like 24, for instance, and I make this thing 4 inches tall? Let's try it out. So as I'm done with this, I'm going to click on Save and close that down. And then it says in SolidWorks, we've now got a new configuration. Click on OK. Jump over here back to SolidWorks, and there's our new configuration called Gabe. Now watch what happened. I made that hole bigger than the part. Double click on it. Now we've got a completely different looking part, even though the values really just changed. It's the same part with different values, but now this circle is on the outside of this rectangle. So we've got a completely different looking part. So keep in mind that some of those values, by changing them, you might end up with different parts. And there's also, if you made, for instance, like a radius here bigger than this length of this line here or something like that, that would give you an error saying this configuration couldn't be built. But still, we have all the other configurations still there just by double clicking on them. And if we wanted to build a assembly from one of these, I can drag them directly from this configuration window into a new assembly, and each one of the configurations would be operated as a separate part. Using Excel and design tables allows you to create a collection of similar parts. This comes in very handy if you're working with something like a bolt. They look about the same, however, they're different sizes and different lengths. The features are created the same with different input values. If you have a design that looks similar to the bolt example, design tables would be a good choice.